So I am here sitting, waiting in an airplane in Krakow, Poland, and I have been traveling in Ukraine, and now I'm heading home. You can see the airport here. Anyway, I have had a really good journey delivering humanitarian aid. I've gone back and forth between Poland and Ukraine 3 times, bringing supplies needed by the people there. During our first trip to Ukraine, we went to a school for the deaf and gave them 20 computers. I met with a family who is caring for 17 orphan children, including one girl who is deaf. And we gave that family some clothes and toys. I met with the president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf. It was a really good meeting and really helped me to better understand how the war is impacting the deaf community in Ukraine. It was a very beneficial trip. Hello, I want to share with you the findings of my research during my recent trip to Ukraine. We are at Maidan Square in downtown Kyiv here, and this makeshift memorial, this ad hoc memorial right here, my understanding is that each of these flags represents a fallen soldier. So, I had the opportunity to meet with the president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf, and it was wonderful. The two of us, we discussed, well, altogether, I was able to meet with 5 different deaf persons there in Ukraine. And it was great and very informative, and I would like to summarize my findings. So the president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf explained to me that 2 years ago, when the war started, everything was very chaotic, and the chaos was worse for the deaf community because they did not have access to information of where they should go or how to evacuate. They just didn't know. They had no communication from the hearing government. So, as a result, many thousands of deaf Ukrainians fled west to Western Ukraine, and also many more thousands from the deaf community fled further west to Poland, to Germany, to France. And then, after the war became more stable in the front lines, people in the deaf community started to think maybe they could return back to their homes, and many of them did, even as far east as near the front lines where the fighting has been taking place. So now the deaf community in Ukraine is heavily dependent on the internet for access to communication. And the government has given them two supports due to the war. First, increased access to psychologists to help people to process the trauma from their experiences in the war. And second, there in the capital city of Kyiv, the mayor of the city has distributed to the members of the deaf community smartwatches for the purpose of informing them, warning them quickly about air raids. So the people there in Kyiv, at least, they benefit from that. But please understand, most places in Ukraine, they do not have smart watches in the deaf community to warn them about air raids. For example, in the city of Dnipro, there was a deaf family, parents with a baby, and the mother had a smartwatch, the dad did not, and there was an air raid, and the dad and child died, but the mother was warned in time and was able to evacuate. Talking with the president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf, she explained that one of the biggest challenges that the deaf community is still facing in Ukraine is that the government does not subsidize or pay for interpreters. Deaf persons need to pay for interpreters themselves. That is a struggle. So yes, when the war started 2 years ago with the full-scale invasion, there was a lot of chaos and confusion in the deaf community, where to go and what to do. They didn't have access to information. Now the situation in the deaf community has improved, at least in Kyiv, with the smartwatches. Last year, I met with the vice president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf. And she and I talked about how the war has introduced a lot of new words into the language, mostly military related. For example, the word drone. These new words are being introduced to the language. This year, when I met with the president, she helped me to understand an interesting phenomenon. Understand, back when the full-scale invasion started, before then, many people in Ukraine spoke the Russian language. 40% of the population were native Russian speakers. It's their first language, and that was fine. But understand, the Russian President Putin, he invented the excuse. One of his excuses for invading was that he argued that Ukraine was not letting Russian speakers speak their language. That is a lie. That is propaganda from the Russian government. The Ukrainian president himself is a native Russian speaker. And what I found there in Ukraine is that now, due to the war, it has had the opposite effect of what Putin wanted. Now in Ukraine, now there is a strong movement. The Ukrainian people have become against the use of the Russian language only now. And this is among the hearing population there. I have met many people who now say, oh, we should not be speaking the Russian language anymore. From now on, we should only be speaking the Ukrainian language in the hearing population. And similarly, in the deaf community, what has happened, as I learned during my interview with the president of the Ukrainian Society of the Deaf, she explained to me that deaf Ukrainians, because of the war, the language is being influenced that signs that have Russian origins, they are being ejected from the language. Ukrainians are discontinuing using those signs in favor of adopting more Ukrainian-based signs. So it's kind of ironic that the Russian president, Putin, he complained that the Ukrainians weren't allowing the use of the Russian language, and because of his invasion, he has caused a rejection of the Russian language, and he wanted more power and more separation from NATO nations. But now, as a result of his invasion, his military has become less powerful and has now a much longer border with NATO. So I want to thank everyone who has helped support my research in Ukraine. It has really helped me to better understand how the war is impacting the deaf community there in Ukraine, and also how the war is influencing Ukrainian Sign Language.